Tower between their inner and outer defensive walls. This area is known as the outer ward of the tower, and this tower we've just come through stands by the outer ward and therefore known as the by-ward tower. Now, this type of defensive area, you generally find the inner walls are tall and thin, whereas the outer walls are shorter but much longer. Now, this area that runs around between the two was also where the Royal Mint was located. Now, in this country, the Royal Mint make coins. A different organisation make the notes, although there seems to be less use for coins nowadays. Now, the Mint here at the Tower of London, from 1100 to 1810, will eventually leave the Tower. There's an exhibition just there about the Royal Mint. Now, interestingly, that area is where Sir Isaac Newton used to live when he was here as Master of the Mint. Sir Isaac Newton introduced the serrated edges to coins, which are used on coinage all over the world now, and he did that to stop people clipping the king's coinage. In this country, the weight of a coin was generally its value. That's why we use the term £1. Anyway, there's an exhibition there about the Mint. Now, these buildings are still used, but when you become a yeoman warder like myself here at the Tower, you also get a house with a job. So these buildings now are some of the accommodation allocated to yeoman warders like myself. When you move into the Tower of London, you move in here, you can move in your families, they can all live with you. So there's actually quite a large community here at the Tower. The Tower Children, there used to be a school in the Tower, but that actually closed down in 1926. So the children of the school go to the local schools in the area. Anyway, there we go. Now, making your way down the outside walls, the Byward Tower, which I've already mentioned. To the left of that, you see the Byward Postern or Sally Port. Now, that is one of the entrances to the Tower of London via the River Thames. Now, remember, in this country, the River Thames is a substantial waterway in the south part of England. It starts over towards Swindon, which is nearly Wales, and covers the whole south of England. So it makes sense to have access to the river. Now, remember as well, the outside area of the tower, the wharf as we call it today, that is quite a new addition to the Tower of London. So these gateways here would go directly to the river, albeit using a small platform. The Byward Postern or Sally Port would be a more prestigious entry to the Tower. Obviously diplomats and kings and whatnot, as they visited this country, come down the River Thames and enter the Tower by the archway. Now, moving around again, behind me now we have this strange shape going on you there. I shouldn't be. You can put me down. My name's David. Put me down now. I've got my own file upstairs. And moving around again behind me now, this is the bell tower. I apologise for that. The bell tower, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the bell tower, it's called the bell tower because on top there is a belfry. Now, within that belfry today is the oldest surviving curfew bell in the City of London. The bell in there dates from around 1651. Now, the bell tower, the warning bell as they called it, when it was rung, gates would be closed, defences back. They used to ring it as well 1 hour before any execution outside the Tower of London on Tower Hill. Now, the bell in there was made in the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, as is the bell in the chapel, Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, as is Big Ben. Remember, Big Ben is actually the bell inside Queen Elizabeth's Tower, the House of Parliament. They also made the Liberty Bell in America. The Whitechapel Bell Foundry, I might add, at this juncture, closed down about 2 years ago. The gates are still there, but the place itself is gone. Now, the bell tower behind me, ladies and gentlemen, is the oldest and strongest surviving of the 13 towers that make up this, the inner defensive wall. It comprised of 2 chambers, one on top of the other. Both those chambers at one stage were used for the incarceration of prisoners. Which brings me on to the subject of prisoners. Prisoners brought to the Tower of London were not peasants. These were state prisoners. And when they moved into the Tower, they didn't go into a central cell block. They'd go into one of the towers, the Byward Tower, the Beauchamp Tower, the Byward Tower, the Bell Tower, the Beauchamp Tower, the Devereux Tower, one of the towers inside, or one of the buildings. Often they'd move in with their families and servants as well. More like birds in a gilded cage. Now, as I say, all the towers of Tower of London have some sort of history when it comes to prisoners. The Bell Tower, the most notable prisoner down the Bell Tower, in the lower chamber where the arrow slits are, Sir Thomas More, whilst at the same time in the upper chamber, John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester. Both of these religious people were imprisoned by Henry VIII, refused to recognise Henry as head of the Church of England. Both of these men eventually made their way from the Bell Tower in 1535, one in June and one in July, from here up to Tower Hill, where they were beheaded. Their headless bodies now remain at rest in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, though their heads remain at rest somewhere else. Both men canonised as saints in 1935 by the Roman Catholic Church. Isn't that lovely? I'm very curious to find out who your mum and dad are. Was he? Oh, there you go. I thought he was just leaving generally. It's all right. Actually, do you know what? On the tours, I'm not speaking here. On the tours, we used to do the chapel in the tours. We don't do them anymore. And at the end of the tour, I'd always be like, because I've got a sort of Santa Claus vibe about me, haven't I? I've got a friend. I am a friendly person. And at the end of tours, I'd often end up with a group of school kids at the end of dads. Mums and dads. Anyway, so the Bell Tower. So Sir Thomas More and John Fisher were kept as prisoners in the Bell Tower. Now, also kept to the Bell Tower, but in the upper chamber, was a man called James Scott. And a very strange story it is too. So James Scott was actually the Duke of Monmouth. He was the eldest of 12 to 15 illegitimate children fathered by Charles II. Now, Charles II dies in 1685. He had a lot of children, no children with his wife. So, the throne of England passes to his younger brother, James the Duke of York, who was then crowned James II. But James II, even before he became King of England, was a very unpopular person and a very outspoken Catholic. So James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, although he was illegitimate, sensing British resentment, raised a rebellion against his uncle in what became, from popular Protestant support I might add, from what became known as the Pitchfork of Monmouth Rebellion. Now, the army was defeated at the Battle of Sedgemoor, which is in Somerset. James Scott was brought to the Tower of London after his capture, held in the Upper Bell Tower with his wife, children and a number of servants. He then made his way up to Tower Hill, where he was beheaded by a man called Jack Ketch. After his execution, ladies and gentlemen, Monmouth's family requested a painting of him, so Monmouth's head and body were returned to the tower, where the head was then painstakingly reattached by the tower surgeon. What? Which actually isn't the worst thing I've heard that goes on here. Anyway, so his head was reattached by the tower surgeon, a painting of Monmouth then made, said to be a good likeness of him, although slightly pale. Monmouth now lies quietly at rest, like so many others, in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, the other side of the wall. One of the few people found here at that time, though, with his head quite firmly attached. Actually, eventually we became so sick of James II, we just said to him, how about you buzz off? And he went. So he asked his daughter and her husband, William and Mary, to become King of England. William was known as William of Orange. He upset the Irish, that's why we have the Orange Day parades. Now, the most prominent person to assist James II with his life was a man called Judge Jeffreys. And Judge Jeffreys was actually the man who sentenced James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, to death. So, of course, when James II leaves, Judge Jeffreys' life becomes a little bit untenable, so he decides to leave as well. But he waiting for a boat to leave London, you had to wait for the wind to blow the right way and the tides. So Judge Jeffreys, in fact, if you go down the River Thames, get the river on your right, for about half an hour, you come to a public house called the Town of Ramsgate, which is still there. Years ago, if you go to the back of the Town of Ramsgate, there's a key there called Pirate Key, because they used to execute pirates there. They don't do that anymore.
That's a good thing.
Anyway, Judge Jeffreys was in there. He was attacked by the London mob. So Judge Jeffreys was brought to the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, for his own safety. Isn't that strange? The tale becomes stranger. Judge Jeffreys then eventually died. He was an alcoholic. He lived in the Bloody Tower, by the way. Now, when he died, he was buried next to Monmouth in the chapel. So he sentenced Monmouth to death and he's buried next to him in the chapel. So in 1692 they exhumed Judge Jeffreys' body and he's reburied in a church called St Mary's, which was at the Aldermanbury. There he lay for many years until the Second World War, when the church was hit by a German bomb. How dare they? After the war, we decided not to rebuild the church, and we offered it to the Americans as a gift. Well, they took it. They disassembled the church and reassembled it next to the University of Fulton, Missouri. Where it now stands. Are you from? No, you're Florida. Anyway, where it stands, the American countryside now. So there we go. Well, I always think it's quite ironic because Judge Jeffreys, one of the worst punishments you could give in those days was exportation, which before Australia was actually America. So you just wondered if Judge Jeffreys in amongst the rubble that found his way to Fulton, Missouri. So you can see a bit of English history not far from home. Well, not as far as this. Anyway, more Tales of the Tower from Traitors' Gate, ladies and gentlemen.